We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Hello there, it's 6 o'clock. Coming up tonight, we're seeing yet another day of the COVID inquiry. It continues, of course, with gusto. With it, the next tranche of name-calling, messages and foul language and analysis of personalities. Absolutely fascinating stuff. But get this right, the COVID inquiry is set to last years, and we've apparently spent about £100 million on it so far. So I'm pondering, is this all really a good use of time and money? Do we need it? You tell me. And we all know by now that councils, lots of them, are going bust. But the amount of cash that the councils are now raking in from the likes of you and I, fining us for everything from wrong parking to driving down the wrong streets or driving the wrong cars is absolutely astronomical. Are we now being seen as the cash cows who will bail out the council's failures? And we all know, don't we, that police stations have been closing down for years. But now there is a new innovation in town. The portable one. Have you seen them? Are these pint-sized porta cabins the key to helping fight crime? Or are they just a little bit of a joke? And the birth rate in this country is in decline. I'm asking, how much does that matter? Yes, we've got all that to come and more in the next hour. But first, let's cross live to Tatiana Sanchez for tonight's latest headlines.
Michelle, thank you and good evening. This is the latest. Buses carrying at least 320 foreign passport holders set off from Gaza earlier, the first in an initial list of 500 people allowed out of the enclave. It comes as more than 80 injured people were taken across the Rafah crossing in ambulances under a deal mediated by Qatar. It's unclear how long the border will remain open, but it's unlikely all of those waiting will make it through today. James Cleverly says UK teams are ready to assist British nationals as soon as they can leave. The Israeli military says 15 of its soldiers have been killed during heavy fighting in its ground offensive into Gaza. That as another airstrike hit the Jabalia refugee camp in the north. Rescue efforts were underway this afternoon as paramedics dug through the rubble in a desperate search for survivors. The IDF says an airstrike yesterday killed a senior Hamas commander who was a ringleader of the attack on the 7th of October. Police are searching for 2 men in the West Midlands after several incidents of mice being thrown into McDonald's restaurants. They've released images of 32-year-old Amir Khan and 30-year-old Bilal Hussain as part of a public appeal. Footage shared on social media showed dozens of mice unleashed in another McDonald's after 2 incidents earlier in the week. A masked gang of pro-Palestine activists hurled the rodents onto the floor in their alleged support of Israel. The US Vice President has arrived at Downing Street a short while ago as several high-profile guests attend the world's first summit on AI safety at Bletchley Park. A warning for viewers: the following contains flashing images. She was greeted by the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who hopes to put the UK at the centre of global efforts to monitor the technology. Earlier today, Kamala Harris announced the creation of the US AI Safety Institute, which will work alongside its UK counterpart. She said the threats posed by new technologies are profound.
It also has the potential to cause profound harm. From AI-enabled cyber attacks at a scale beyond anything we've seen before, to AI-formulated bioweapons that could endanger the lives of millions of people. These threats are often referred to as the existential threats of AI, because, of course, they could endanger the very existence of humanity.
A former top civil servant says former Health Secretary Matt Hancock displayed nuclear levels of overconfidence in the early days of the pandemic. Helen McNamara was Deputy Cabinet Secretary in 2020 and 2021 and played a key role in Britain's COVID response. She told the inquiry that rules were routinely broken in the daily course of government and that Boris Johnson displayed a breezy confidence regarding the pandemic, which she found jarring.
It was striking that something that I felt personally was obviously deeply worrying, that there was a sort of de facto assumption that we were going to be great without any of the hesitancy or questioning or that sort of behind closed doors bit of government, which isn't about saying everything's smashing and going brilliantly, but actually being a bit more reflective. The sort of unbelievably bullish, we're going to be great at everything approach is not a smart mentality to have inside a government meeting.
Amber weather warnings are in place for the south coast of England and parts of Pembrokeshire in Wales as Storm Ciarán nears the UK. The Met Office says wind and rain could bring potential risk to life and property. A red wind warning has been issued by Jersey Met, with gusts of almost 100 miles per hour expected. Parts of Northern Ireland have already been flooded due to heavy rainfall. People have been warned not to travel. The King has called for action, partnership and commitment to combat environmental challenges as his state visit to Kenya continues. The King told the United Nations in Nairobi he's seen the effects of climate change firsthand before planting a tree to commemorate his visit. His Majesty then joined Queen Camilla on a visit to an elephant orphanage where the Queen fed a calf. The monarch also visited an urban forest to highlight the importance of green spaces in our cities. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back to Michelle.
Thanks for that, Tatiana. Yes, I'm Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock tonight. Alongside me, Alan Miller, the co-founder of Together Declaration campaign, and Peter Edwards, a former editor of Labour List. Good evening to both of you.
Good evening.
I don't want to sound like a massive Luddite or anything, but I have been looking at this AI conference and some of the things that people have been saying, and people have been warning, haven't they, about this risk to humanity for quite some time now. And I don't think I'm a Luddite, because I am quite into technology, but there is something about AI that terrifies me. And it makes me think sometimes, why are we just never happy with what we've got and what we do? Why are we so desperate to keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing to the next development, the next thing?
I wish we were wanted to do that more, Michelle, to be honest. I think in infrastructure and innovation, we've become sluggish. We've become fearful of Frankenstein-type technology because we see ourselves as not being able to control things and then being out of control. AI becomes this doom-mongering thing that's going to take control of us, rather than us thinking about how we can use it for processing, machine learning, development, and have agency over it. And the more we think of ourselves as slaves to things and things being out of our control, the more that can become a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Yes, there are concerns, particularly around privacy and surveillance, and we should be really diligent and vigilant about that. But actually, they're great opportunities for us to harness and develop more.
I've got to say that my data privacy would be the least of my worries if I had a field of robots turning on us, about to wipe us off the face of the earth. And maybe I am just being a little old-fashioned and alarmist. Where are you on it?
I think there's nothing wrong with being cautious. You know, going to election, every politician's going to be asked, well, how would you make the NHS work better without just writing check after check after check? So I suspect AI, on which I'm not an expert, may be part of things like that. But if you're jokingly calling yourself a Luddite, I'll call myself boring, because I think this does make the case for things like regulation. And whether you're looking at smoking 80 years ago or social media over the last 20 years, sometimes the market has raced ahead of regulation than there are social harms.
It has, and I can tell you what, already trying to follow the Israel-Hamas stuff, sometimes I sit and I look at things and I really do struggle to think, is this actually real? Is it genuine? Is it manipulated? And that's already, we're only just at the very start of this technology. What do you make to it all? Anyway, you know the drill, don't you? It isn't just about us three and my random news headline rants. We've got a packed agenda for you guys coming up tonight. I want to talk to you about the COVID inquiry, councils that are failing in what they should be doing, which is balancing their books and getting us lot, I feel like, anyway, to bail them out. And I want to talk to you about police stations and lots more. GBViews at gbnews.com is how you can join the conversation, or you can reach me as well at Twitter at GBNews. Now, as I've just been alluding to, it is another day indeed in the COVID inquiry land. I have to say, you're going to be facing this for quite some time, because this inquiry is scheduled to last 4 years, and I don't believe it'll finish when it actually says it will, and I dread to think how much money is going to be spent on this. I think estimates at the moment say we've spent about £100 million so far, and today was the time, as you've just been hearing there, the former Deputy Cabinet Secretary Helen McNamara. She was up speaking about the extent of conflict and dysfunction inside Downing Street. Absolutely fascinating stuff, no doubt. You can get your popcorn out to it. But is this really, Alan, a good use of time, effort, money? And will it actually really produce any meaningful outcomes when it comes to potential next pandemics?
I think the problem is, Michelle, that the terms of reference have been very problematic, and there is no real scrutiny about whether we should have even have had lockdowns. One of the crucial questions. Why is that omitted? That has made people very distrustful and cynical because of the amount of damage. We'll talk about some more of that on the show, I'm sure, about the damage that's been played out across the economy and elsewhere. But so I think in principle the idea of having an inquiry is a sound one, a proper inquiry where you have proper terms of reference. The trouble is with this is that we've seen almost a hankering for saying, why didn't you lock down sooner? Why wasn't it longer? That's the parameters. So even though we get these revelations, which some people were saying at the time, and we saw how much the basically stigmatising people, censoring them, now we're seeing in plain sight why that was so egregious and problematic. The problem is, what we need is some robust measures to make sure this doesn't happen again. And that's why, together, what we're saying is you have to have cost-benefit analysis, you have to dispense with the elements in the Public Health Act that meant you could just have a lockdown. You have to make sure you have proper scrutiny in Parliament, transparency, open debate, no censorship. And the public, your viewers and everyone else, has to put pressure on MPs and others to make sure we don't have this again, because this, in 6 years' time down the road, it'll be a bit like the Iraq War moment when they talk about Tony Blair. And we need to exert some of our own control over all this.
And I've got to say, all this, maybe it's just I'm focusing perhaps too much, because there'll be people there that did lose loved ones that we're all deeply affected by COVID, but, you know, whose families really haven't recovered from the impact of COVID. But when I just read, you know, oh, is Dominic Cummings misogynist? Do they swear at each other too much? Is it a toxic environment at Parliament? I think, oh, shut up. What's that got to do with the price of fish? These people are not even going to be in power the next time there is a pandemic. So what does these individual personalities policies got to do with anything?
Well, I think it matters because they were the decision makers, and
But there won't be next time.
No, but there's, in my whole lifetime, and probably even further, there have been disagreements in Downing Street between the people privileged to run the country. It seems to have been especially toxic with Boris Johnson, Cummings around this time, and obviously that's why it's in the news agenda now. But of course, the inquiry's been chugging away for many months and has a lot further to go. By the way, I think there's no censorship at all. And the fact we're having a vigorous debate like this shows there's no censorship. But I think having an inquiry is the right thing. I checked the mortality statistics today because they're still being published and people are still dying of COVID. It's around about 230,000 in the UK. So my question would be that with that many dead, 230,000, we obviously had an economic crisis at the time, and whatever your view of it, fundamental changes to rules, laws and culture in Britain at very short notice. So we'd go through all of that and then not have a learnings exercise seems to me a bit daft.
Yeah, I don't mind having a learnings exercise. I think that's quite sensible. But the things that I want to be learning is stuff like who decided what constituted a COVID death? Who decided this is what goes on?
Well, I can tell you that.
The COVID death certificate. Why was there seemingly no kind of set standard, normal standard globally as to who counted a COVID death in which way? It seemed to vary depending on which country was measuring what.
Well, I suspect with anything that involves government intervention, getting 200-odd countries in the world to line up. And remember, although I think the Tory government made huge mistakes, the one area I have sympathy for them on is the speed with which they were forced to make decisions. It was very, very quick, and we know China was not transparent in releasing information. Generally, I think the British government did not handle it too well. But I think the question you asked points to why an inquiry is necessary, because there are things Britain has control of, and there are things like in a financial crisis that require joining up globally.
Go on, you wanted to come in.
Well, what we've seen is a political class bereft of clarity and ideas, willing to do a U-turn, being under pressure, outsource responsibility, an opposition that shouldn't be called that. Most of the media that only wanted to tub thump and champion for more things. Now, lots of people reeling back saying, we didn't really want to do all of that. We didn't want to just follow the science. We didn't really want to lock down. It was unprecedented when there was a pandemic preparedness strategy that we had in the United Kingdom. We've seen Sunetra Gupta and many scientists presented that to the government, but because of certain things like modellers and some technocrats and the idea that the public needs to be contained and limited rather than doing a proper scientific evaluation of who is most at risk and how to do it, which, by the way, many people argued at the time, this is not hindsight. That's why this bit of a whitewash, and the censorship part is the fact that we had a rapid response unit by the government and a counter-disinformation unit, which is still there, Orwellian terms, spying on citizens and journalists and shutting down a debate where we could have had this open
Is
and
this that 77 Brigade?
Well, they were involved in it too, but it's across the board, right? The DCMS, who are meant to be about the media and sport, underwriting part of it. You've got a whole situation wherein we jettisoned our freedom in this country and, at the same time, we plundered our economy, we put it into massive lockdown. It had huge consequences. We've now got over 7 million people waiting on the NHS. Where are all those people screaming now about the deaths? They're not here anymore, right? It's absolutely abhorrent, and I think that people need to take account, and that's why the public needs to be much more involved in this, and we need to say what we need, rather than have basically a lot of incompetent people who are running things, outsourcing, not willing to take responsibility, doing things to us using straplines.
Bernard, one of my viewers, he's saying these inquiries are only being held, he says, for one reason only, which is to make lawyers money. He said there'll be nothing to come at the end of the day. There'll be no real accountability. Tom says, I would really like to see the breakdown of all the money that has been spent, that will be spent, and who is managing these budgets, and whether or not these... I don't believe that this inquiry will stick to its time frame or its budget, whatever that may look like. I think this will rumble on and get out of control cost-wise. Do you?
To be honest, I'm not too keen on the throwaway comment about it's just money for lawyers, because I think it is a job of governments to learn lessons. But I think, was it Bernard wrote in?
Yeah.
I think he does have a point about timeliness. We've had some very long inquiries in British public life that have been seen to overrun. But if you look at some of the recent ones, COVID, 230,000 dead, Bloody Sunday, that went on for many years,
It did.
child sex abuse, which I think was established by Theresa May and set up when she was Home Secretary. These are matters of huge importance about whether it's social, health, sexual crisis, so it's right that the state looks into it.
I know, but, you know, things seem to take such a long time in the public sector. This is not, it's not COVID. I'm not suggesting it's COVID. Like I saw the other day, the inquiry into the suicide bomber in Manchester. That popped up the other day on my timeline of news. And I thought, well, that was years ago. And it was this ruling that actually the fella was determined to be a suicide bomber. And I thought, well, it's taken you how long to ascertain that information? Because anyone whose eyesight worked could have told you that right at the beginning. So I just think, I don't know what it is that takes so long. I would like to see the role of the media questioned and whether or not there was enough questioning permitted on the media, because it was, I'll never forget those 5 o'clock deaf conferences. Do you remember we used to gather around our table for the next slide, please, to be terrified within an inch of our lives as to how many people had got ill or died that day?
Well, this is why you need proper scrutiny, you need transparency and openness, you need context. If you're going to talk about deaths, you need to talk about deaths that normally occur every day, every month, every year, cancer, heart disease, strokes. You need to have a proper grown-up conversation. Who's at risk, relatively and absolutely? How do you best mitigate that situation? What's the cost and benefit of doing something? Put it to the public, be democratic. Don't nudge them with behavioural insights team, with terroring fear, petrifying people, telling them they're granny killer. Don't shut down our schools. Why not follow a model like Sweden did and other outliers, right, that had an epidemiologist who understood these things, rather than going with modelling? These are things that we must remember. That's why Together is saying we need to make sure we take account of this, that we hold our political representatives accountable, but also that we change some of the things moving forward. And we're going to insist that we lobby and campaign and make that happen. And actually, we're saying our votes in this election year are going to be dependent on it up and down the country.
Les is saying, Michelle, you know, your panel, they're all talking about this and that and the other, but ultimately every country made mistakes. Why is this country, though, looking to apportion blame? I mean, there are investigations and inquiries going on in different countries at a somewhat different pace and speed, I have to say, to this country. Mel says this COVID inquiry is another HS2 scandal. There's really quite divided opinions, actually. Alma says, again, this is all just a blame exercise. Let's just try and focus on learning as opposed to trying to blame. David said, yes, it's a waste of time. No one will be accountable for it, and it will just carry on business as usual. I'm hearing, like I say, mixed opinions on that. If you did lose someone that you love with COVID or from COVID, what do you make specifically to the COVID inquiry? I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on that. GBviews at gbnews.com. I'll be moving on after the break. There's a lot to cover. Failing councils. Are you and I responsible now by stealth for bailing them out? Is that right? You tell me.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christys, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry-7. Alan Miller, the co-founder of Together Declaration Campaign, is alongside me, as is Peter Edwards, the former editor of Labour List. Now, keep your thoughts on that COVID inquiry coming in, and I shall try and read some more out before the end of the programme. But for now, look, we all know that so many councils are literally on the cusp of going bankrupt. And I have to say, I have to give credit where it's due. It's not just a particular party. This is right across the board. It is not party specific. And obviously, there are many different reasons as to why that is happening, but it does not escape my notice, and perhaps yours too, that so many times now, so many councils, they are absolutely raking it in terms of how many fines and the breadth of fines that they are now issuing to you and I, the everyday people. So, for example, 60,000 motorists are being hit by £12.50 ULEZ charges every single day. We've got councils wanting to hike parking fines by up to 25%. And I could go on. There's so many different ways now councils are really raking in the cash. And I feel a little bit like some kind of stealth ATM that's been expected to fund the mismanagement of incompetence, and I don't like it.
Well, there's a couple of different things going on here, Michelle. I think you're absolutely right that there's been this whole approach of taxing, surveillance, restricting. They talk about 15-minute cities in places like Oxford and Bath, but actually what it means is bollards and cameras. We don't have service provision. We can't even get to see a GP where they're there, let alone being in a new one in 15 minutes. If all this new public transport is going to be provided in areas where it's not there, and if these amazing infrastructure was there, that's one thing, but that isn't provided. What we've got, surveillance, taxes, more fines. In Haringey, over 4 months, 2 million in revenues. You've mentioned ULEZ. Up and down the country, we've seen in the Midlands, 50,000 people challenged the clean air zone and had their challenges upheld. But we've got a bigger problem, and that is that Britain has been sluggish for a long time. That's why Together Association, we've got a cabinet that we've launched to drive certain areas where we have the economy, housing, innovation. We need to have a situation where we have a future-orientated Britain, where we have coastal development, where we have investment, where we have infrastructure, build houses, create new jobs, retrain, let the zombie companies fail. None of this is being presented by the government or by the opposition. That's why we need to have a new manifesto, really, where the public is at the heart of things.
Cool. Do you trust the public to be making the key decisions, driving the future of this country? Is that what we need, more public involvement?
I think I always trust the public because we're the public and we're paying for it, and that's especially true of local authorities. I disagree with an awful lot of what Alan said, but I want to come back to the stories that you highlighted because they are grimly fascinating, really. You know, we've got several local authorities. I think the biggest one is in Birmingham in trouble. Their equal pay claims is £1 to £2 billion in Birmingham. But I was very interested in the media coverage. So this is a credit agency, Moody's, flagging a concern about council resources. And it's not very good for David Cameron, his premiership, when you look back at it. Years of austerity, so local government funding cuts of 40 to 60%. and then David Cameron's government scrapping the Audit Commission, which was a statutory body that looked at local government finances. So it's a non-vindication of David Cameron. I've got a lot of sympathy for local authorities, whatever their political stripe, because I think they're having to make deeply difficult decisions about how you keep public services going. And yes, that's why they are trying to eke out, revenue from buying parking permits and so on and so on.
Do you think there's a few too many incompetent people in local government?
Well, I'm always wary of generalisations, but I think every single part of the British state could perform better than it does, and that takes nothing away from their hard work.
And do you think if someone is incompetent and leads, for example, their council onto the edge of bankruptcy, whether it's doing things like not paying people according to the law, or whether it's thinking that you're some kind of UK Donald Trump real estate speculator and making it disastrously wrong, do you think then you should lose your jobs? Do you think you should face, in some cases, I would argue, perhaps criminal prosecutions? Because to me, that doesn't often happen. These people seem to sail off into the sunset with these beautiful pensions, only to pop back up in a different role in the not-too-distant future.
Well, there's a lot there. So I think politicians, mayors and council leaders obviously face election every 4 years, so they can lose their jobs and their status and so on and so on. People right at the top of councils, remember, we're talking about probably 0.01% of local authority employees, because a lot of people are on very modest salaries, but people who run local authorities tend to be quite well paid. But I think they need to have a special skill set to deliver that job, because they're responsible for so much, in a sense.
What's a special skill set?
Well, I think they need to be very good at things like finance and audit, and then I think they need a...
Well, they're failing. If your special skill set to run a local authority is finance and audit, something is going catastrophically wrong.
Well, the catastrophically wrong thing, one of them, is a 40 to 60% funding cuts from central government.
But I do find this interesting. I think that some people just want to remove around bits of money we've got already. Since the 70s, we've had sluggish growth. We need to have people paid more money. We need to have more productivity. That means making investments. The levelling up discussion, for instance, the relationship between local authorities, the 406 or so in the rest of the country, the only way we're going to get dynamism and wealth creation is to have proper investment, R&D, not in an election cycle of 4 years, but planning for the next 50 or 100. And the problem is people have stepped away from that. They're risk averse. There's a lack of ambition. They want to outsource to consultants. Leadership is missing. And then they want to play a blame game. And in the middle of it, the citizens, local constituents are the ones who suffer. And the resolution is not to do what American cities have done, which is what's happening here more and more, which is tax and fine and restrict and have a war on motorists and a war on freedom of mobility, active travel and livable streets, which thankfully now the Department of Transport has stopped funding Mark Harper because of our interventions. That is directly to blame for these things. And I think the more the public says these things and gets involved, the better.
Well, you are the public at home. Do you think that you want... Well, do you want more involvement? What would that look like? Do you want a series of referenda?
Referendums are always a good thing, but I think that what we need to have is what the public needs and a discussion and a debate openly. We've not had that. We've not had that about many things. Even when we do have
What does that look like?
What that looks like is in every area, in innovation, in housing, in the economy, is what are the needs of the public, first and foremost, in the NHS.
That's all nice words, but how do you ascertain all this stuff?
In each area, you have to present that and you have to discuss it. So if you think the role of the NHS is to have an ideological, really big bureaucracy and you don't have efficiency in delivery, then carry on with the model we've got. If we think it should be about expediting service to people quickly, and you can do that in a range of ways like they do in Germany or other countries, for instance, then that's what should be put on the map. Similarly, in education, could you have more of a mixed use? Should it be so ideological or not? Let's have the interests of what people need at the heart of things. Think of that first, because too much of the decision-making has been based on 30 years of technocrats not being under pressure from the public and just saying, this is what you need, this is the next ideological choice. We're not really going to do... It's tinkering. And we need fundamental change, particularly in innovation and investment, R&D.
Do we?
I think we all want better R&D. The question is how you get there. Because, to my mind, too much of what Alan said was either a generalisation or wrong. To take one example, referenda. Referenda are not that popular. There is not a public demand to have more referenda, even on a local level. To give another idea, the suggestion that we take things out of the political cycle. Now, there's something to be said for that, and cast your mind back 7 or 8 years. When Ed Balls was Shadow Chancellor, he had the idea of a National Infrastructure Commission. Labour lost the election, but that idea was picked up by George Osborne for exactly the reason you described, Michelle, that big decisions, HS2 is one of them, and we're all a bit sick of talking about HS2, but you take decisions like that out of the political cycle, there is some kind of body of qualified people that look at what the country needs in 30 or 50 years' time.
Yeah, but the problem is people will be sitting at home going, it's fascinating to talk about 30 or 50 years' time. But then what happens is that businesses prepare themselves to, I don't know, so you've seen this petrol and diesel ban, that was supposed to be, what was it, 2035? And then so everyone's gearing up for that. And then, no, so it was supposed to be 30, then it gets pushed back. So the problem is people will argue and say, yes, it's great planning, but then those plans don't really get stuck to. They get changed and chopped, and then businesses don't know if they're Arthur or Martha, if they're coming or they're going.
Well, I understand that. That's the problem of not having clarity. But it's like the leader of the Liberal Democrats saying, well, if we were really going to have nuclear power, we wouldn't have energy independence until 2022. And the point is, if we don't commit to infrastructure development, to investment and R&D as a principle, we're not going to get there. And that doesn't mean not dealing with the problems we've got immediately, but it means putting them front and centre. That's the thing that we need to address properly, and the public's got to be at the heart of it.
Well, there you go. The public got to be at the heart of it. Do you want to be at the heart of it? And what would that look like to you? There is a lot coming your way. I want to talk to you about law and order after the break. The smallest, tiniest little police stations, I would argue, perhaps ever might have seen. Is this the way forward? I also want to ask you as well about the falling birth rate in this country. Does that matter? You tell me if so, why? I'll see you in 2.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle.
Could you be quiet? What is this? It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News,
the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these 3.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tonight at 8 o'clock.
I've got an interview with Tony Abbott, a world-leading statesman, former Prime Minister of Australia, explaining the intricacies of the Israel-Palestine problem and how the West has to be strong. He's also going to talk about free trade and how the UK and Australia can be prosperous.
Hello there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7 o'clock. Alan Miller and Peter Edwards remain alongside me. Lots of people are getting in touch about that council situation. If they cannot spend their money properly, then they should absolutely all be sacked, says Beverly. Do you think we've got this great talent pool there to replace those people at the top of the councils? I'm not sure about that. Duncan says tradesmen and delivery courier services, etc., should boycott all of these areas. He's talking about the ULEZ areas, etc. And then let's see how long it would take those councils to decide that indeed the working class are welcome there again. Richard says part of the problem with councils is some of the high salaries paid to senior officials getting paid far more to run part of the country than the Prime Minister does for running the entire country. Is that true? Regional mayors, are their salaries, well, regional local councillors, I guess, are their salaries higher than the Prime Minister?
Some of the council leaders are, I think they go up to around 180.
Well, we've got to be clear what we're talking about. So I think ordinary councillors don't get a salary.
Yeah.
Mayors will get a salary. Some declined to take it and I believe did the job for free because they're already members of Parliament, like Dan Jarvis in South Yorkshire. But some, and it goes without saying, some council officers, unelected officials, do get paid more than 100k. So similar level to the Prime Minister.
There you go. Maurice, you make a really interesting point, actually. You say the near disappearance, basically, of local newspapers has allowed councils to underperform for their direct taxpayers. And I think that's a really interesting point, actually, the decline of local media, because you're quite right, national, you can't always drill into those local issues. You want to come in?
Can I say one thing just about what's it all look like? It should be said that up and down the country, residents and businesses have got involved and challenged these charging tax fees. We've seen in a range of places residents who are very well informed, who've got together, who've challenged their councils and said these measures don't work, they're a problem. We've seen people standing independently. In fact, in Hackney, there's someone standing independently on the 9th of November that has been challenging LTNs and ULEZ, where they've got 75% of them closing down. We've seen that actually, the public, individuals who run businesses and are residents, are very articulate and very clear about what's needed in their areas. And that's why we've got this campaign, Free Our Streets, and we'd encourage more people to get involved with it.
Well, there you go. And I'll tell you what is popping up on our streets. Have you seen this? I think I can bring a picture up for you now, because we talk often, don't we, about the lack of police on the streets. We talk about the police stations that have been closing down. Well, look at this. This is kind of like... It reminds me a little bit, you know, when you go to supermarkets and you see those, like, pop-up key cut places and stuff like that? Well, this is like a miniature pop-up police station now. Look at it. It's apparently in Crawley, I think it is, in Sussex, and it's about helping people feel that there is a presence in their local area. You can see the officer there proudly sitting inside of it. If I was sitting inside that, I would be absolutely terrified that someone pushed me over. You know, like when you go to a festival and you sit in the Portaloo. I never relax in a Portaloo in a festival because I'm always frightened that some joker will push me over backwards. But maybe, yeah, that says more about my mindset than it does those cop shops. What do you think to them?
Well, without thinking about Doctor Who, I mean, I think a number of things have happened, haven't they, right? We've seen a massive decrease in policing, which at the most senior levels, right? So there's been an attempt to recruit new people, which has come in. But also, even in the last year, we've seen over 4,000 people leave the force, many of them with decades of experience. We've also seen a situation where the implementation of measures and the way policing is done has been focused on some really problematic areas, like what people are tweeting about or what they're saying about certain things, whether it's trans or other controversial issues, rather than things like burglaries and assaults, serious things that the British public's very concerned about. So we've got a couple of issues that need to be addressed. I also think in the issue of knife crime, if we don't address the the white elephant in the room. If we don't address this discussion about the war on drugs, abject failure, the fact that there are gangs that have got knives and the fact that there's a whole illicit black market trade from terrorists and others that make money from it, and that if you put it into the realms of the Treasury making money from it, you control it as a legal substance. As we saw, prohibitions never work. We saw that in America where the mob was huge till they legalised it, alcohol again. Many nations have begun to explore with this thing. I think we need to have a serious conversation in Britain. If the public are not into it, fair enough, have it openly democratic. But that's one of the issues around policing. And I think that across the board we need to see a situation where and also there's not that much public support in some areas for policing, and we need to address that question as well.
Yeah, which I think is quite disgraceful, by the way, when you hear all these people saying they don't respect the police and all the rest of it. I think to myself, you know what, if someone was trying to murder you, I bet one of the first things you'd do is dial 999 and get those people that you do nothing but criticise and undermine and all the rest of it to come and try and help you. But anyway, Peter.
Yeah, I want to try and answer your question, which I'm not sure Alan did. I think there is a place...
Told you, Alan.
I think there is a place for small-scale, cheap innovation like the pop-up police stations, because they can provide reassurance and do things affordably. But in no way at all is it a compensation for something like 660 police stations that have been closed down since 2010. We have to realise these things are a consequence of austerity. And yes, you know, that can provide, the pop-up you showed in Crawley and Sussex can provide reassurance, and there is a positive to it, and it is probably quite affordable. But austerity has damaged British infrastructure to such an extent. The other one we talked about on this show about a month ago was Chris Philp, the policing minister, saying, oh, if you see shoplifting or someone doing something improper, try and carry out the arrest yourself if you can't get a policeman to attend.
Oh, yeah, the citizen's arrest.
Yeah, and citizen's arrest is abolition law, but the idea that we're so bereft as a British state that we do the policing and the arrests ourselves, putting ourselves in danger, is a bit of a nonsense.
Well, I will say one thing about that, though. I mean, like those brave citizens that stood up to the nihilist terrorists on London Bridge and elsewhere, those brave people that fought them, I was proud of that. And I get your point, and there should be provision. But at the end of the day, I'm not so concerned and worried about the idea of decent citizens standing up together. In fact, I actually quite like the idea of a kind of society where the public hold the line and say, don't do that to the children and other people, support one another and demand a kind of cultural backdrop of decent behaviour, social behaviour, unlike the situation we've got now. So I wouldn't poo-poo it as much.
I'm not poo-pooing it briefly. I'm talking about ordinary folk who haven't been trained putting themselves in harm's way.
I asked, if you want to know anything in this world, ask a taxi driver. And I asked a taxi driver today who happened randomly to be a former police officer. I was asking him about these pop-up police things, and he said to me, there is a difference between a police station and a police office. And I said, is there? And he said, absolutely. And he said, and what they're trying to do is replace the police stations with these police offices. And I thought that was really interesting. And actually, I think one of the biggest, if you was to trace back and look at the root causes of some of the problems in society, it is the removal of those police stations, isn't it? You make... I want to know what you think to that. I'm always interested as well to hear from a police officer. Would you even feel safe sitting there, potentially on your lonesome in that little porter cabin thing? And would you feel perhaps more reassured as a resident if one of those things did pop up on your local high street? Is it the answer to fix crime? You get in touch with your thoughts on that. I want to talk to you after the break. I want to bring in lots more of your conversation, but also ask you, the declining birth rate in this country, does it matter? Are you worried about it? Your thoughts?
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best.
Bellissima.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
delicious?
mental?
Open your mouth. Okay, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa!
Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows,
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. Join me, Mark Dolan, Fridays and Saturdays from 9, Sundays from 10. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, Michelle Dewberry with you till 7. Alan Miller, the co-founder of Together Declaration campaign, alongside me, as is Peter Edwards, the former editor of Labelist. I love you guys at home. I really do enjoy our conversation. Roy, you've just given me a fascinating insight about my great-grandfather, Charlie Dewberry, and his history in some of the previous conflicts, which I was not aware of. I've got to say, I've never spent any time researching my family, but that insight made me smile, so thank you very much for that. Again, this COVID pandemic, Joanne says it's all just a waste of money, this investigation. It was a pandemic, the first of which in its kind in modern times. No matter what lessons are learnt, they will be useless, she says, because the next pandemic is likely to be totally different. Andy said, you know, so many people died. It is important that we find out just how incompetent and inept the political class were when faced with this unprecedented situation. But why, Andy? Because those same people won't be there next time. So I just don't really get that. Again, Gary says, yes, the inquiry, because we want their actions to have consequences. And Janie says, can we start a petition to stop the inquiry? It's a blame game at eye-watering costs. You're saying that you don't trust most of what is coming out of that inquiry. That is a sad state of affairs, isn't it? Let me ask you this. The ONS figures show that the UK's natural population apparently will start to decline in 2025, given the fact that our birth rate is at a record low. I've got to say as well, when you expand this and look across Europe, the picture there doesn't look quite so good either. Are you concerned about our falling birth rate, Peter?
I'm not too concerned about the rate, although I'm not particularly qualified to opine. I'm concerned about the reasons why it's happening, though.
Why are you not qualified to opine?
Because I suspect there are people like demographic scientists who know a lot more about this than I do. But when you look at the reasons why, I think those are alarming. And I suspect they all come down to money and hardship in different form. We know that more people are living alone. We know that people are settling down and getting married later. Fewer people getting married. Obviously, you invest in your child, you know, at any time in British society. But we also know that buying your first home is a lot more expensive than it used to be. Very quickly, I've got a couple of stats for you. Average price for a first-time home in London, just over £500,000, UK-wide, £300,000. I suspect it's getting more challenging economically to have a family. So that's why I'm worried in some ways.
It's funny, isn't it? Because my grandmother, when she had my dad, he was playing around in the rubble in the Second World War. That's not funny, but the prospect of nutrition, the prospect of having a house, the cost of living, all of those things were daunting. But people had ambitious ideas about the future, what they could do about it, how they could do it, and they saw themselves as a part of a community and a society that believed in something. Yes, there's issues with housing, hence my point about an investment and 10 million new houses and infrastructure. But the much bigger problem we face in Britain and much of the West is a belief in who we are and where we're going. We're told at our schools that we're toxic, that we're like termites destroying the world, we're nasty, our whole history has been pornographic and evil and disgusting. Why should anyone want to reproduce in those circumstances? Why would you want to bring a child into a world when you think that this whole world is just going to end up in catastrophe and doom? Because, let's face it, we're all nasty and we're scavengers. I think the thing is that we need to have a really big discussion about how we see ourselves in the future. Why is it that so many young people at university and others aren't getting into relationships, sexual or others, right? Why is this situation happening? It's not just money, right? There's been, in previous generations, we've had much more challenges financially, yet the whole idea of us being vulnerable and at risk and danger, that's what dominates. And that's something that's really serious, and we have to get to grips with it.
You know, there'll be many people that say, Michelle, I don't really care about whether or not people are having less kids. But then on the flip side, they'll also say, if I ask them about immigration and whether or not we should have migration caps and all the rest of it, those same people will say, I absolutely don't want uncontrolled immigration or heightened immigration, which I always find quite interesting, because then I think, well, if people are not having enough babies, and you don't want new people to come to the country, who is going to look after us then when we are old? And the other interesting angle to this, and perhaps I can debate this properly on another day, is whether or not the NHS, for example, should be responsible for helping, say, single women who want to have children but don't have a partner. Should the NHS be providing IVF treatment to those women? Is that the purpose of the NHS? That one, I know, will divide opinions. I might touch on that properly another day. Talking about that police porter cabin, Peter is laughing. He says, has Doctor Who landed in Sussex? Many of you are getting in touch on this one, I've got to say. Frank says, we've got one in Eastbourne. Trevor said, you started your programme talking about AI. Maybe we could replace policemen with robots. Graham says these porter cabins should surely be larger to accommodate 2 officers at all times, and he's hoping that they are 24 hours a day. He's worried that they are going to get vandalised. Barry, you're a sensible guy. He's saying, what about planning permission? Did they get planning permission for that shed?
It's a temporary structure, I suspect. But there is a bit of an irony that we started off talking about AI, and at the end, the solution to public services is a bloke sitting in a tent in a town centre.
Jan says this is missing the point. It's not about sitting on the street. It's about patrolling the streets and making people feel safer. Tony says, please can you remind your guests that all the austerity that has been discussed tonight was as a result of the last Labour government. He says people seem to forget that. Ray says, can you ask Peter how many police stations were open or closed 1997 to 2010? He knows the Tory figures. Does he know the Labour ones?
No. But I do know there's a global financial crisis in 2007-8.
There you go. Ray, does that answer your question or not? Darren, you're a harsh guy. You say this is just another place for PCs to hide and drink coffee and eat donuts when they should be out on the streets talking to the public. Bernard says this is another poor decision made by police chiefs, basically proving how much pathetic and weak thinking there is in our country. Harsh man. That's all I've got time for. Peter, Alan, thank you for your time. I've got a dash tonight, ladies and gents. I'm going to see Jordan Peterson. What a treat. I look forward to that. Have a good night, whatever you're doing. Nigel Farage up next. Night.
Hi there, welcome to the Met Office forecast for GB News. This is Aidan McGiven. Storm Ciarán won't affect everyone, but in places it will bring spells of rain and disruptive or even damaging and dangerous winds. It's predominantly going to affect northern parts of France into the Channel Islands, southern parts of the UK. The wet and windy weather sweeping in overnight. The heaviest rain affecting Wales and the southwest initially before moving into the rest of England and southern Scotland by the end of the night. The winds strengthening, peaking around southwestern shores during the early hours with a risk of 70 or even 80 plus mile-per-hour gusts. And it's certainly going to be a very blustery start to Thursday. The strongest of the winds transfer along the coast to affect southeastern parts of England into the afternoon. And again, Around coastal areas, 80-mile-per-hour wind gusts are a possibility, or even more than that in some of the most exposed parts. Inland, 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts, so the risk of damaging wind gusts in places, dangerous coastal conditions and disruptions to transport. But elsewhere across the UK, actually, it's a blustery day. However, the strongest of the winds will be across southern areas. And then into Friday, sunshine and showers for many as Ciarán moves through. Again, a gusty day for northeastern parts, but the wet weather easing to showers. And this weekend, we'll see a spell of rain move in across southern parts of the UK, clearing to showers later.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the dinosaur hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.